would like to preface this by saying that by reviewing this book, I am quite literally risking my life. So I wasn't completely joking when I said I'm risking my life. This book may be small, but it comes with a heck of a lot of backstory. This is also the first book I reviewed that is actually, like, bad, like, infamously bad. But it's also not hugely well known. Now I'm actually going to have to split this video into a few different parts, possibly 3, because I've already written about 13 pages of material. I had a lot of opinions on this. But in this first part we'll look at the book in general terms and delve into its tragic backstory. So The World Rose by Richard Britton. Well, let's hear what he has to say about it. An epic fairy tale romance set in a semi-fictional ancient world, containing elements of action, adventure, poetry, and comedy. The title has a triple meaning. The central character is a renowned beauty, the rose of the world. While the rose flower features heavily in the plot, and it also implies that the world rose up. When Ronwind Drake discovers treasures in a distant paradise, a new golden age seems set to begin. But Ella Tundra will find that all which glitters is not gold, as she faces many obstacles in her quest for true love. Simply sublime, says David Janssen. A masterpiece, enthuses Emily Ford. I can't wait for the movie, quips Xavier Kirk. And then about the author. Richard Britton aims to bamboozle and bedazzle as much as to thrill and delight. He was brought up by Sting in Africa and won Series 55 of Countdown. His inspirations include Sir Edward Elgar, William Shakespeare, and the Beatles. So for those unaware, Countdown is a British tea time show where people have to solve number puzzles and letter puzzles, and if you win 8 episodes in a row, you get a teapot. Richard Britton became one of those lucky teapot owners in 2006. Then in 2010 or 2011 he started a YouTube channel where he posted random bits of classical music. And then in 2014 he self-published his magnum opus and also posted a video of him reading out the opening, which is still up, and for some reason the comments haven't been disabled, so they're quite fun to read. Usually I would feel a little bit bad about reviewing, rather harshly should I say, a self-published book, but not in this case, because Richard Britton is a terrible person. He came under fire in 2014 when he actually attacked someone who had negatively reviewed his book on Wattpad by stalking her to Scotland, which is 400 miles away from his home near London, and then clocked her around the head with a wine bottle while she was working in Asda. He was sent to prison in 2015 with a 30-month sentence, but he only served half of it when he was released in 2017. And then, as far as I'm aware, in 2019 he actually tracked her down again and began sending her creepy letters, but there's been done about it because apparently they can't do much about that. He also stalked another young woman called Ella Durant, Richard Britton had a blog called The Benevolent Stalker, where he fantasised about, like, kidnapping her and stuff. So why do I bring this up? Firstly, because he's a creep, and that's why I don't feel bad about ripping this book to shreds. B, the main character's name is Ella Tundra, with Tundra being an anagram of Durant, the woman he has stalked. Which just seems a bit of a creepy comparison, but you know. So that's the backstory over. And that is why I might die, because he isn't above tracking down and attacking his critics. And I'm now wondering if maybe I should be reviewing this book at all. Oh well. So let's look at this book in more detail. The World Rose is part fairy tale, part fantasy, part romance and part comedy. It follows Ella Tundra, who is the princess of Celtia, and she wants to find her true love, the one who holds the key to her heart. Meanwhile, the rulers of the other kingdoms and empires have their sights set on Celtia. So before I get into ripping this book apart, is there anything good to say about it? I'm joking. I'm sure I can find something I liked. Let's see. There were some good names. There were some very stupid names too, but I liked the name Quintus Northwood. Actually, I quite liked him as a character. He was the only sensible person there, and I felt very sorry for him. I also liked the name Dungeon Hark because it made me laugh every time I saw it. Also, you know, if I ever have a kid, I know what I'm calling it. Especially if it's a girl. You know, I wrote down that I thought the grammar could be worse, but that's only because I wasn't reading it that much. I wasn't thinking too hard about that, because I knew if I read it that closely, I would be scribbling on it with a red pen and going workshop mode in it, and I didn't want to do that. So the grammar probably isn't that great. I just didn't really notice it. It's not so bad that it makes it difficult to read. It's actually a very, very easy book to read. It's very simply written when it's not being silly, which is most of it, so make of that what you will. The only reason this is such a struggle to read was because it was so stupid in details of the plot and characters that, you know, it made me want to smack my head against the table. That's it. That's all the good things about it. I liked 2 character names, and the grammar could have been worse. So a lot of the stuff I want to talk about is quite plot specific, so I'm only going to go into things quite vaguely in this bit, or like the generic issues, and then talk more about the specific things in the plot section. Because I don't recommend this book to anyone, I'm not even going to tell people to skip it, because spoilers, just don't read it. Just run away from it. So the prose was bland. It's what I would call juvenile prose or fan fiction-y prose, and that's not to say that young people and people who write fan fiction can't do it well, because they can, but there are certain stylistic choices I notice that come up a lot in fan fiction when written by younger people, and it's stuff like this. It's stuff like having flat prose and the bare minimum in terms of character actions, which makes it dull. The description is extremely shallow and mostly used in regards to things like clothes and like forests. I have a lot of thoughts on description anyway. I like description, it's one of my favourite things. So I could probably do a whole video talking about just description. So I won't go into it in too much detail here, but the bare bones is that description should do more than just describe something. It should imply things like emotions, themes, foreshadowing, character, purely through the word choice. Or it can just be very beautiful and pleasing to read. It does none of these things in this book. And when it does actually describe things, it's always pointless things like what clothes people are wearing, which are useless details that no one needs to know about. Unless people's fashion choices are particularly outlandish or unfamiliar to the main character, you don't need to talk about clothes. Generic features like hair colour also don't matter. You're far better off describing something more unique to each character, like a noticeable scar, or calloused hands, or a large nose or something. Leading on from this, here's another habit that I notice a lot in fanfiction, and that is a fear of using names and pronouns. That is constantly referring to characters as the blonde, or the petite barmaid, or whatever. It's really irritating. For several reasons. A, you only ever think of a character as the something if you don't know their name. You just think of them as their name otherwise. B, I don't remember what character was blonde. Blonde is such a boring detail, and therefore not something I allow to take up valuable real estate in my very bad memory. The blonde was sporting purple breeches. I don't know who that is. Just say who was doing it. And pronouns are allowed. You can say he or she or they or it or whatever. They're invisible words. The reader skims over them, and they only become a problem if you have like 3 women in one scene and you're saying she all the time, we don't know who's talking. But don't say the something, because I find it very annoying. And he did this all the time. And the dialogue also is not an indicator of who was talking, because all the dialogue was somehow both No. The dialogue was neither unique or consistent with any character, so you could never tell who was talking by dialogue alone. And it was stupid and didn't know if it wanted to be modern or oldie worldy, so that was also annoying. There is no sense of character. Ella Tundra has enough personalities for a whole army, whereas everyone else has none. We get snippets of character from some. Gulliver the Bard was fairly memorable. And Quintus felt like a distinct human, but I don't remember anything about anyone else. The plot was really stupid and focused far too much on military tactics, because that's what you want out of a fairy tale romance. The world building was non-existent, there was no sense of scale, I didn't know where anything was, there were no maps, I love maps. There was no cultural identity, nothing about power struggles or internal relationships. There's one large empire called the Assyrian Empire and no one even seems to know where it is. I have no idea if magic exists or not. There's a seer who has prophecies, and there are healing potions and mentions of wizardry and a mysterious whistling crystal at one point, but it's never explored, so I have no idea how much magic is in this world or how understood it is. There were some great themes, but the author either didn't notice or didn't bother expanding on them, so actually there were no themes. The ending made me want to throw someone out of a window. The genre and tone confused. It was trying to be fairy tale, fantasy, romance and comedy, which usually is fine. These genres can work together in most combinations. And The Princess Bride, the film, I've not read the book, actually managed to get all four of them to work together in a very cohesive and enjoyable film. With this book, it just seemed to sort of pluck random elements from each genre and then mash them together in a way that none of them gelled. The fantasy was unexplored and random. The fairy tale elements were neither whimsical nor deep, both of which are important in fairy tales, and I will fight anyone who disagrees. The romance was stupid and the comedy was too slapstick to take seriously, and it got to the point where I wasn't sure how I was meant to be reacting to anything because I didn't know if it was meant to be funny or serious. Actually the entire book suffered a lack of consistency. Originally I was gonna stop here and have the entire plot of the book as its own video, but for the sake of not making this one too short or the next too long, I am generously deciding to go through the first couple of chapters to whet your appetites. So we start with a prologue. I don't know why it's a prologue, because it's not really separate from the rest of the book, as prologues tend to be. But you know, fantasy always starts with prologues, so... we meet our main character, Ella Tundra. Today's story is The World Rose by Richard Britton. Once upon a time there was a great forest realm. High on a hill, among the yew trees, stood a castle. Inside it lived a princess whose name was Ella Tundra. Her hair was golden brown, and her eyes were blue like the ocean. Her smile could melt the hearts of knights, and her voice was delicate, like a leaf in the wind. Tundra was in her name, but not her nature, for she was neither cold nor bleak like tundra, but warm and vibrant like a meadow in summer. At 23 winters old she was world-renowned. Word of her loveliness had spread around the globe to distant lands and far-reaching empires. She has a pet bulldog called Duncan, although I initially misread this as bullfrog, which I thought would have been far more interesting, but there we go. The dog is an idiot, and it is the only time I have ever wished harm to come to a fictional animal, because I find that annoying. I don't usually I cry if an animal gets hurt in fiction. This time I was willing the dog to just get eaten by a bear or something. It was irritating. Ella and Duncan discover a mysterious key. Duncan's the dog, I don't know if I said his name. Oh. So Duncan the dog and Ella discover a mysterious key shaped like a rose with a golden spiral twined around it. A servant then arrives with terrible news. Ella's father is dead. That is the prologue. It's like 2 pages long. It's very short and pointless. So then we get into chapter 1, and chapter 1, a few things stood out to me immediately. Firstly, we learn that the father has been dying for a while, and Ella has been by his bedside for most of that time, but by chance hadn't been there at the moment of his passing because she was too busy whining that she hadn't found true love. I found this odd, because if your dad is dying, you're not thinking about true love, you're thinking about your dying dad. So she comes across as either callous or vapid. Certainly not like a meadow in summer of whatever it was. Secondly, his death came as more of a shock than a surprise. They literally mean the same thing. I even checked the definitions and they mean the same thing, so that was a stupid line. Thirdly, the dad's name was Aelfwode, which seems aggressively Old English compared to everyone else's, especially when we learn his father and grandfather were called Harold and Wedgwood. I don't know, it stood out as a really odd name. Anyway, Ella is to become queen in a few days, but she wasn't too worried, as her father had taught her great qualities instead of knowledge and believed in life experience over studies. Which in most situations I would sort of agree with, but when you're trained to be queen, you gotta know stuff. But okay, whatever. She decides to visit a seer called Saxophilius, because she's always wanted to hear his great wisdom. She'd never gone before because the establishment, who I suppose was King Aelfwode, trusted neither wizardry nor Saxophilius, for reasons unexplained. King Aelfwode, by the way, was also known as the Druid King, which sounds pretty wizardy to me, so I don't know what's going on there. Ella goes out one morning wearing a veil which is presumably to mask her identity, and doesn't seem to tell anyone she's leaving. She also doesn't take guards, she doesn't take weapons, she doesn't take a horse, despite the journey being like 2 days there and back again on foot. And she also doesn't know the way. So she's just wandering through the forest, like, I don't know what her plan was. In the forest she meets a bard who, for some reason, randomly uses archaic terms like thou. He has green eyes that are glazed and maniacal for some reason. Ella reveals to him straight away that she's actually the princess, so I don't know what the point of wearing the veil was. And she invites him to her coronation in 3 days. Gullivander, or Gully, because that's a shorter name, his main role in the book is to sing songs and recite poems about how beautiful and amazing Ella is, which he does very frequently. It's getting late, so he walks her to a tavern where they can stay for the night. Ella reveals her princessness to the barmaid as well. Then she has a dream about a dark tunnel and a door which she unlocks with her key. And then there's a knight on the other side, but before she reaches him, she falls flat on her face. Because, you know, comedy. Chapter 2. Back on the road, Ella meets a merchant whose name is Jandrol Heth, but I call him Maleficent because he wears 2 purple dyed cones on his head for some reason. She doesn't reveal her identity to him because I think she was offended he didn't recognise her. She says in the narration, either he did not know of the famous princess, or he assumed that this was another Ella. Perhaps, after a day of travel, she did not look quite as stunning as she often did. Her veil covered her hair and some of her face, but she was beautiful nonetheless. Now the book feels like it's close third person, as in all the narration is filtered through Ella's thoughts, which makes she comes across quite vain, therefore. But in a previous chapter, when Gullivander was waxing lyrical about her beauty, she responds, "Thanks, but I don't think so." So I assume that she is incredibly vain, but wishes to exude an air of modesty, and therefore that's why she doesn't make any sense. The only thing consistent about her character is how inconsistent she is. Right, so she answers some of Maleficent's questions about, like, taxes and stuff. Then they part ways. She frolics in a meadow, enjoys the sunny day, goes into a forest and suddenly thunderstorm. And then there weren't any clouds earlier, I don't know. She finds Saxophilius and, despite coming for his sagely wisdom, which you'd expect to be about becoming queen, she asks him about the key and true love, and he tells her this prophecy. "A key without a lock is useless," the seer began. "But the one you seek for love possesses a lock matching this key, and it guards a chest carrying tremendous treasures. For many mighty kings and princes desire you, but one shall rise above the rest, and he brings an everlasting dynasty. He will come to conquer this realm, and there will be a great battle. When you know that he is the one, you will collapse in a field of cloth and gold, and he will carry you home." And that, my friends, is where we stop for now. Will Ella make it back in time for her coronation? Will she meet her true love? And will she find out what lock her mysterious key opens? Tune in next week for The World Rose Part 2.